The alien princess's scream pierced the station's neon-lit darkness as a jagged blade tore through her stomach. Ex-Marine Logan Hicks trudged through the seedy underbelly of Xanthos Station, his battered boots crunching on broken glass and rusted metal grates. The acrid stench of plasma discharge and stale alcohol hung heavy in the recycled air. Hicks was here to meet a contact about a job, but his gut churned with a sense that something was very wrong. The meeting was supposed to be in a bar called the Rusty Plasma Coil, but it had been a ghost town. A high-pitched, agonized wail cut through the station's clamor, snapping Hicks's attention to a grimy alleyway. The scream was followed by cruel, guttural laughter. Hicks's hand hovered over his holstered blaster as he crept towards the alley, ready for anything. At the alley's end, he saw a crumpled female form slumped against the wall. Her regal dress, made of shimmering daxamite silks, was shredded and splattered with dark cerulean blood. A hulking crawl male towered over her, casually wiping a jagged, dripping knife on his filthy pants. "Step away from the girl," Hicks growled, his blaster now trained on the crawl. "Nice and slow." The crawl sneered, his scarred face twisting with contempt. He gestured carelessly at the injured daxamite. "You want her? Fine. She's all yours, human." With a dismissive grunt, the crawl lumbered past Hicks and melted into the station's shadows. Hicks kept his blaster ready as he approached the daxamite, kneeling beside her. She was young, barely more than a girl. Strange, intricate tattoos marked the blue skin of her face and neck, the royal sigils of the daxamite rulers. The alien princess's eyes fluttered open. They were a striking lavender hue. Her gaze locked onto Hicks. "Sanctuary," she rasped, her voice laced with desperation and pain. "Please!" Then her eyes rolled back and she went limp, succumbing to her injuries. Hicks knew he couldn't just leave her here to bleed out or be finished off by that crawl thug. With a heavy sigh, he holstered his blaster and scooped the unconscious daxamite up in his arms, carrying her back towards his ship. He had a sinking feeling he'd just stumbled into something way bigger than a simple bodyguard job, but he couldn't ignore a cry for help, especially from a wounded princess, even if it meant putting himself in the crosshairs of whatever trouble she was running from. Logan laid the unconscious daxamite princess down on the bunk in his ship's cramped living quarters. The bunk was little more than a cot, wedged into a tiny alcove between two bulkheads. Logan rummaged through his medkit, pulling out antiseptic wipes and adhesive bandages. He peeled back the shredded silk of Talis's dress, revealing the jagged gash across her stomach. Dark cerulean blood oozed from the wound. As Logan cleaned the gash, his eyes were drawn to a strange bracelet on Talis's wrist. It was made of some unfamiliar silvery metal, inlaid with intricate circuitry that glowed faintly blue. Suddenly, the bracelet began to hum and vibrate. Logan jerked his hands back, startled, as a shimmering hologram materialized above the unconscious princess. The hologram depicted a regal-looking daxamite male, clad in ornate robes. His chiseled face was etched with worry lines. He began to speak rapidly in an alien tongue, his voice rising with urgency as he gestured at Talis. "Damn it," Logan muttered under his breath. "I knew I should have paid more attention in those xenolinguistics classes." Talis stirred, her lavender eyes fluttering open. She caught sight of the hologram and gasped, struggling to sit up on the bunk. "Father," she rasped in heavily accented Terran, "I have failed. They have the codex." The holographic king replied, his voice heavy with anguish. Though Logan couldn't understand the words, the pain in the king's tone transcended the language barrier. Talis hung her head, crystalline tears slipping down her bruised blue cheeks. The king's hologram turned to Logan, gesturing first to him, then emphatically to Talis. The princess nodded weakly, and the hologram flickered out, leaving the bracelet dark and inert. Logan ran a hand through his close-cropped hair, feeling the first throbs of a tension headache building behind his eyes. "Look, Princess—" "Talis," Logan sighed. "I'm not a bodyguard or a hero. I'm just a merc trying to get by out here." But Talis's gaze didn't waver. "You are my only hope," she insisted. a note of desperation creeping into her voice. "The fate of my entire people depends on retrieving the Codex." Logan opened his mouth to ask what the hell a Codex was, but he was cut off by a shrill alarm blaring through the ship. The proximity alert. Another vessel was approaching, and judging by the angry red warning lights flashing on the console, they weren't coming in peace. "Son of a bitch," Logan swore colorfully. He lurched to his feet and sprinted for the cockpit, leaving Talis to struggle upright and limp after him on unsteady legs. The ship shuddered as the first plasma blasts impacted the shields. Whoever was after the princess, they'd caught up to them, and they didn't seem keen on talking things out. Logan's fingers flew across the console, coaxing the ship's battered engines to life. The Krall ship loomed on the view screen, weapons glowing ominously as it closed in for the kill. Talis staggered into the cockpit, clutching the bulkhead for support as the deck shuddered beneath her feet. "Friends of yours," Logan shouted over the scream of straining engines and the bone-rattling impact of blaster fire against the weakening shields. Logan wrenched the controls, sending the ship into a stomach-churning roll in a desperate attempt to evade the relentless barrage. "What the hell is this Codex?" he demanded, his knuckles white on the yoke. Talis hesitated, her lavender eyes flickering with uncertainty. "It's an ancient Daxamite artifact," she said at last, her voice low and tense. "A key to a weapon of immense power. I was tasked with keeping it safe, but I was betrayed. The Krall have it now, and they'll sell it to the highest bidder." Talis's hand gripped his shoulder, her fingers digging into his flesh with surprising strength. "Not if we get it back," she said fiercely, her eyes blazing with determination. Talis leaned forward, pointing to a dense field of asteroids looming ahead. "There," she said urgently. "Fly into the belt. We can lose them in the rocks." Logan hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to find another way. But with the Krall ship bearing down on them and their defenses crumbling, he saw no other choice. With a muttered prayer to whatever gods might be listening, he sent the ship hurtling towards the treacherous maze of stone. The Krall ship followed, hot on their heels as Logan wove through the deadly asteroids with white-knuckled precision. Jagged rocks loomed on every side, threatening to smash them to oblivion with the slightest miscalculation. Suddenly, a massive asteroid appeared directly in their path, seeming to materialize out of nowhere. Logan yanked the controls with all his strength, but it was too late. The ship slammed into the unyielding rock with a sickening crunch, the impact hurling Logan and Talis from their seats as everything went black. Logan came to slowly, his head pounding like a drum. Emergency lights flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows across the wrecked cockpit. He touched a hand to his brow, wincing as it came away slick with blood. Talis lay slumped in the co-pilot's seat, a nasty gash marring her forehead. Logan reached for her with shaking fingers, his heart in his throat until he found the steady throb of her pulse. Gingerly he hauled himself to his feet, groaning as pain lanced through his ribs. He staggered to the rear of the ship, his stomach sinking as he surveyed the destruction. The engine room was a twisted ruin, the FTL drive little more than a sparking husk. They were dead in the water, helpless and alone. As he limped back to the cockpit, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He froze, his blood running cold as he saw the Krall ship looming just beyond the view screen, a boarding craft already detaching from its hull. They were coming, and there was nowhere left to run. Logan's calloused fingers dug into Talis's shoulder, shaking her awake with an urgency that overrode any semblance of gentleness. Her lavender eyes fluttered open, widening in alarm, as she took in the dire situation they found themselves in. The acrid stench of fried circuitry and scorched metal filled the air, mingling with the coppery tang of blood. Wordlessly, Logan thrust a blaster into her trembling hands, his gaze boring into hers. "Tell me you know how to use this," he growled, his voice low and tense. Talis nodded grimly, her slender fingers checking the weapon's charge with a surety that belied her royal upbringing. They took up position on either side of the airlock, weapons trained on the battered door that was the only thing standing between them and the Krall borders. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness, each one stretching into an eternity of taut nerves and bated breath. Then, the unmistakable sound of the airlock being forced reached their ears, a metallic shriek that set their teeth on edge. Logan's finger tightened on the trigger, his heart pounding a staccato rhythm against his ribs. With a hiss of decompression, the door slid open, revealing the hulking forms of the Kraul mercenaries. Logan and Talis opened fire immediately, blaster bolts filling the confined space with a searing red glow. Several Kraul crumpled to the deck, their lifeless bodies smoking from the deadly shots, but more poured in, their own weapons spitting lethal energy as they returned fire. Logan ducked behind a bulkhead, the heat of a blaster bolt sizzling past his ear as he narrowly avoided being hit. Talis cried out as a shot grazed her arm, the acrid stench of burnt flesh filling the air, but she gritted her teeth and kept firing, her aim true despite the pain. It was a losing battle, and they both knew it. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and it was only a matter of time before the Kraul's superior numbers overwhelmed them. Suddenly, a deep resonant boom shook the ship, the deck plates vibrating beneath their feet. The Kraul paused, looking around in confusion, as another boom echoed through the vessel, then another. The ship rocked violently, sending everyone stumbling as they fought to keep their balance. Logan risked a glance out the viewscreen, his jaw dropping at the sight that greeted him. A massive, unfamiliar ship had appeared, dwarfing the Kraul vessel like a leviathan from the deep. And it was firing on the Kraul, its weapons pummeling the smaller ship with relentless fury. The Kraul ship returned fire, but it was clearly outmatched. Within moments it was reduced to a smoking ruin, its hull breached and venting atmosphere into the void. The Kraul aboard Logan's ship seemed to realize they had lost their backup. They redoubled their efforts, pressing forward with a grim determination born of desperation. Logan and Talis were forced back, step by agonizing step, until they found themselves cornered in the cargo hold, the cold metal of the bulkhead pressing against their backs. The Kraul leader leveled his blaster at Logan's head, a cruel sneer twisting his scarred face. "The Codex!" he snarled, his voice dripping with menace. "Where is it?" Talis stepped forward, her chin high and her lavender eyes blazing with defiance. "Safe from filth like you!" she spat, her words laced with contempt. The Kraul snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger as rage contorted his features. Logan tensed, his muscles coiling like springs as he prepared to make a desperate lunge. Suddenly a blinding light filled the cargo hold, searing Logan's retinas and forcing him to shield his eyes. He blinked rapidly, spots dancing in his vision as he struggled to make sense of what was happening. The Kraul were frozen, seemingly paralyzed by the brilliant radiance that engulfed them. Talis, however, seemed unaffected. She grabbed Logan's arm, pulling him towards the light with an urgency that brooked no argument. "Come on," she urged, her voice cutting through the eerie silence that had descended upon the ship. Logan stumbled after her, his arm thrown up to shield his face from the searing brightness. They stepped into the light, the world around them dissolving into a white void, and found themselves in a vast, unfamiliar hangar bay, sleek alien ships arrayed around them in neat rows. Talis sagged against him, relief etched into every line of her face. "We're safe," she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. Logan looked around, his heart still pounding and adrenaline surging through his veins. "What the hell just happened?" he demanded, his mind reeling as he tried to make sense of their sudden change in surroundings. Talis managed a weak smile, her lavender eyes meeting his. "My people. They found us." As if on cue, a group of Daxamite soldiers marched into the hangar, their boots ringing against the polished deck. Their leader approached Talis, dropping to one knee in a show of respect. "Princess," he said, his voice rich with relief, "you're safe." Talis nodded, then gestured to Logan, who stood awkwardly beside her, still clutching his blaster. "Thanks to him," she said, her tone brooking no argument. The Daxamite rose, his eyes narrowing as he eyed Logan warily. "You have our gratitude, human," he said, his words stiff and formal. "But this is not your fight. We will take the princess from here." The Daxamite commander's jaw muscles bunched, his eyes narrowing as he looked from Logan to Talis and back again. But Talis's fierce glare brooked no argument. The commander gave a curt nod, spinning on his heel and striding from the room. His boots rang on the polished deck, the sound sharp in the tense silence. Logan fell into step beside Talis as they followed the commander through the gleaming corridors of the Daxamite ship. Talis's face was set in a mask of determination, but Logan could see the weariness in the slump of her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. He leaned close, his voice a low murmur. "Princess, I appreciate the vote of confidence, but I'm not sure I'm cut out for this." He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture betraying his unease. "I'm just a merc." Talis turned to him, her lavender eyes boring into his. "You're more than that." Her voice was quiet but intense. "You risked your life to save me, a stranger. That's the kind of person we need." Logan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, they were ushered into a large, dimly lit room. A holographic map of the galaxy hovered in the center, casting an eerie blue glow over their faces. Talis stepped forward, the light from the map playing over her features as she pointed to a remote sector. "This is where the crawler headquartered," she said grimly. "If the Codex is anywhere, it's there." The commander frowned, the lines on his forehead deepening. "Princess, that's deep in Krull territory." His voice was tight with tension. "Even with our stealth technology, infiltrating their base would be a suicide mission." Talis set her jaw, her chin lifting in a gesture of defiance. "It's a risk we have to take." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what was at stake. If the Krull unlock the power of the Codex, the entire galaxy is at risk. Logan stepped forward, studying the map with narrowed eyes. An idea was forming, the beginnings of a plan taking shape in his mind. "What if we don't infiltrate?" he said slowly. "What if we get them to bring the Codex to us?" All eyes turned to him, the silence stretching taut. Logan pointed to a nearby system, his finger hovering over the holographic stars. "The Krull are mercenaries, right? So we offer them a job, a big one." His voice was gaining momentum as the plan solidified. "Big enough that their top brass will want to handle it personally, and we make sure they know the payment is Daxamite tech, the kind of stuff they couldn't get their hands on otherwise." He looked around, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "They'll bring the Codex as insurance in case it's a trap." Logan grinned, the expression feeling strange on his face after the tension of the last few hours. "Hey, I once convinced a Zorgax warlord I was a famous opera singer." He shrugged, the gesture deliberately casual. "I think I can handle a few Krull." The commander shook his head, his expression darkening. "This is a bad idea," he growled. "We should stick to protocol, play it safe." Talis rounded on him, her eyes blazing with a fire that belied her battered appearance. "Playing it safe is what got us into this mess," she snapped. "We need to take a chance, do something unexpected." She turned back to Logan, her gaze fierce. "Let's do it, but we need a backup plan in case things go wrong." Logan tapped in the final code, and the door to the communications room slid open with a soft hiss. Talis followed close behind as he stepped inside, the door closing behind them with a muffled thud. The room was small and dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the blinking lights of the various consoles and screens. Logan's fingers danced across the keypad, inputting a complex series of codes and frequencies. For a long moment, there was only the hum of the equipment and the soft sound of their breathing. Then, with a flicker of static, a hologram burst to life in the center of the room. The figure that materialized was a far cry from the sleek uniformed Daxamites. He was human, his face a roadmap of scars and hard living. One eye had been replaced with a glinting cybernetic implant, giving him a vaguely unsettling appearance. "Riggs," Logan greeted, his tone casual despite the tension in his stance. "I need a favor." Riggs scowled, the expression pulling at his scars. "Last time I did you a favor, I ended up in a Zorgax prison." His voice was a gravelly rumble, a testament to too many years of cheap booze and cheaper smokes. Logan winced, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "Yeah, sorry about that, but this is important. I need you to set up a meeting with the Crawl, a big job, top secret. Riggs's eyebrows shot up, disappearing into his hairline. The Crawl, what the hell are you mixed up in, Hicks? Riggs leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. Logan could practically see the wheels turning in his head, calculating risk versus reward. I might know a guy who knows a guy, but it'll take time, and it won't be cheap. Logan nodded, his jaw set. We'll pay whatever it takes. Riggs was silent for a long moment, his cybernetic eye whirring softly as it focused on Logan. Then he nodded. All right, I'll be in touch. With that, the hologram flickered out, leaving Logan and Tallis alone in the sudden darkness. Tallis turned to Logan, her lavender eyes wide in the dim light. Do you think he can do it? Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. Logan shrugged, trying to project a confidence he didn't quite feel. If anyone can, it's Riggs, but we need to be prepared for anything. He turned, leading Tallis back out into the bright, sterile corridors of the Daxamite ship. They found the commander in the main control room, his brow furrowed as he studied a series of holographic readouts. He looked up as they entered, his expression guarded. We need a strike team, Logan said without preamble. Small but highly skilled, and we need them ready to move at a moment's notice. The commander hesitated, his eyes flicking to Tallis. She met his gaze steadily, her chin lifted in silent challenge. Finally, he nodded. I'll assemble our best. Logan turned to Tallis, his expression serious. And we need to get you trained up. If things go south, you need to be able to defend yourself. Tallis nodded, a determined set to her jaw. I'm ready. Over the next few days, the sleek corridors and gleaming training rooms of the Daxamite ship became Tallis's world. Logan pushed her hard, drilling her in hand-to-hand combat, weapons handling, escape and evasion tactics. It was grueling, punishing work, leaving her muscles aching and her skin slick with sweat. But Tallis never complained, never asked for a break. She threw herself into the training with a single-minded intensity, her Daxamite strength and reflexes serving her well. She learned quickly, her movements becoming more fluid and precise with each passing day. Yet there was a desperation to her efforts, a franticness born of the knowledge that each moment brought them closer to the inevitable confrontation. The fate of her people, of the entire galaxy, rested on her shoulders. The weight of that responsibility drove her, pushing her to the limits of her endurance and beyond. And then finally the call came in. Riggs had done it. The meeting was set. Logan and Tallis stood in the armory, gearing up for the mission. They checked and double-checked their weapons, ensuring each piece was in perfect working order. Around them, the strike team did the same, a dozen of the Daxamite's finest warriors preparing for battle. As they made their way to the hangar bay, the commander pulled Logan aside. His face was lined with concern, his eyes hard. I don't like this, he said, his voice low and urgent. It's too risky. We're putting a lot of faith in a human we barely know. Logan met his gaze steadily, unflinching. You're putting your faith in Tallis, and so am I. Without another word, he turned and strode towards the waiting ship, Tallis falling into step beside him. The ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics, and together they stepped into the unknown. The die was cast. There was no turning back now. The ship shuddered as it lifted off, the artificial gravity pressing them into their seats. Logan glanced at Tallis, seeing his own grim determination mirrored in her eyes. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The stars blurred into streaks of light as the ship leapt into hyperspace, hurtling towards the remote, barely habitable moon where the meeting was set to take place. Each parsec brought them closer to the Crawl, to the Codex, to the fate of the galaxy itself. In the cramped confines of the ship, the strike team checked and rechecked their gear, their faces set in hard lines. They were the best of the best, hand-picked for this mission. But even they couldn't fully hide the tension that radiated from them, the knowledge that they were flying into the heart of enemy territory with only the slimmest chance of success. Logan and Tallis sat apart from the others, huddled over a holographic map of the meeting site. It was a bleak, inhospitable place, all jagged rocks and swirling dust storms. The perfect place for an ambush. "We'll set down here," Logan said, pointing to a narrow ravine. "It's defensible, and it gives us a clear line of sight to the meeting point." Logan's jaw tightened. "Then we fight our way out, whatever it takes." The ship shuddered again as it dropped out of hyperspace, the red-brown surface of the moon filling the view screen. Logan's hands flew over the controls, guiding them down towards the surface. The landing was rough, the ship bucking and shuddering as it settled onto the uneven ground. For a moment, there was only silence, the stillness broken only by the hiss of cooling engines. Then Logan stood, his hand resting on the butt of his blaster. The ramp lowered, and together they stepped out into the swirling dust and harsh, unfiltered sunlight. The Kraul were waiting, their weapons gleaming in the harsh light, and somewhere among them, hidden and guarded, was the Codex. The key to everything, and they would take it back whatever the cost. The ship shuddered as it settled onto the barren, wind-swept surface of the moon, kicking up a cloud of dust that swirled around the landing gear. Logan, Tallis, and the strike team disembarked, their boots crunching on the rocky ground, weapons held at the ready. The icy wind whipped at their faces, tugging at their clothes with ghostly fingers. The meeting point loomed ahead, a decrepit, abandoned mining facility that seemed to crouch on the landscape like a rusting behemoth. Its metal structures groaned and creaked in the constant gale, the sound setting Logan's teeth on edge. They made their way inside, the howling wind giving way to an eerie, echoing silence that pressed down on them from all sides. The air was stale and thick with the stench of decay and neglect. Shadows pooled in every corner, seeming to writhe and shift in the dim, flickering light of ancient glow panels. The Kraul were waiting for them in the main chamber, a dozen heavily armed warriors standing in a loose semicircle. Their leader was a massive, scarred brute of a man, his face a twisted mask of cruelty and cunning. Logan stepped forward, forcing a confident smirk onto his face, even as his heart hammered in his chest. "I hear you're looking for work," he said, his voice echoing off the rusted metal walls. Logan nodded to one of the Daxamite soldiers, who stepped forward with a sleek, gleaming weapon. The Kraul's eyes gleamed with avarice as they took in the advanced technology. "And what's the job?" the commander asked, his tone carefully neutral. Logan leaned in conspiratorially, his voice low. "A high-value target, a Daxamite royal. They'll be heavily guarded, but with your skills and our intel, it should be a cakewalk." The Kraul commander's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering in their depths. "And why come to us? Why not handle it yourself?" Logan shrugged, the gesture carefully casual. "Politics, this needs to be deniable, that's where you come in." The commander considered for a long moment, the silence stretching taut between them. Then slowly he nodded. "Half payment now, half when the job's done." Logan gestured to the soldier, who handed over the weapon. The Kraul examined it greedily, his fingers caressing the sleek lines of the barrel. "And the target, when and where?" he asked, his voice thick with anticipation. Logan held up a data chip, the small square glinting in the dim light. "It's all here, but first a show of good faith, the Codex. I know you have it." The commander stiffened, his hand twitching towards his weapon. "What do you know of the Codex?" he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. Logan met his gaze steadily, his expression unwavering. "Enough to know it's valuable, and that it's my insurance. No Codex, no deal." There was a long, tense moment, the air crackling with tension. Then slowly the commander reached into his vest and pulled out a small, ornate box. Logan took it, his heart pounding in his ears. He opened it carefully and stared. It was empty. Logan's head snapped up, but the Kraul commander was already moving. With a roar he lunged at Logan, a hidden blade flashing in his hand. Logan barely had time to react, throwing himself to the side as the blade whispered past his throat, so close he could feel the kiss of its icy edge. And then all hell broke loose. The Kraul warriors opened fire, red blaster bolts filling the air with a searing heat. The Daxamite soldiers returned fire, the chamber erupting into a cacophony of weapons fire and screams. The stench of ozone and burnt flesh filled the air, choking and acrid. Logan rolled to his feet, drawing his blaster and firing in one smooth motion. A crawl warrior went down, a smoking hole in his chest, but two more took his place, their weapons spitting death. Logan looked around frantically for Talis, his heart in his throat. He spotted her crouched behind a rusted metal pillar, firing steadily, her face set in a mask of grim determination. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the chamber, the force of it throwing Logan from his feet. He hit the ground hard, his ears ringing, his vision blurred. Through the smoke and dust, he saw a gaping hole where the far wall used to be, and through that hole, more Kroll warriors pouring in, weapons blazing. Logan staggers to his feet, his head pounding, his vision blurred. The acrid stench of smoke and burnt metal fills his nostrils. He shakes his head, trying to clear the ringing in his ears. Through the haze of dust and debris, he sees Talis crouched behind a twisted metal beam. A group of Kroll warriors advance on her position, their blasters spitting red bolts of energy. Without hesitation, Logan charges forward, his own blaster drawn. He fires as he runs, the shots taking down two Kroll before they even realize he's there. The others turn, their weapons swinging to train on him. Logan ducks and weaves, the bolts sizzling past him, close enough to feel their heat. Suddenly a blur of movement catches his eye. The Daxamite soldiers rallying around their princess. They engage the Kroll in close quarters, the clash of blades and the crackle of energy weapons filling the air. The chamber becomes a chaotic melee, a whirlwind of striking limbs and flashing steel. Logan reaches Talis, grasping her arm and hauling her to her feet. "We need to get out of here," he shouts over the din of battle. Logan wants to argue, to tell her it's too risky, but the fierce resolve in her lavender eyes stops him. He nods, then turns to the Daxamite commander, who is grappling with a hulking Kroll warrior. "Cover our exit," Logan yells. "We'll find the Codex." The commander hesitates, clearly wanting to protest, but a sharp look from Talis silences him. He nods curtly, then turns to his soldiers, shouting orders in rapid Daxamite. Logan and Talis slip away in the chaos, ducking into a side corridor. The sounds of battle fade behind them, replaced by the eerie groans and creaks of the ancient facility. They move quickly, checking each room they pass, blasters at the ready. The corridor twists and turns, a labyrinth of rusted metal and deep shadows that seem to writhe and shift in the flickering emergency lights. Suddenly Talis stops, her head cocked to the side. "Do you hear that?" she whispers. Logan strains his ears. At first there's nothing, but then faintly he hears it. A low hum, a vibration that seems to come from the very walls, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. They follow the sound, the hum growing louder with each step, until it fills their skulls, sets their teeth on edge. It leads them to a heavy, reinforced door, a complex electronic lock glowing softly in the gloom. And with that, she steps forward, grasping the door with both hands. Her muscles strain, the tendons in her neck standing out like cords. A low growl escapes her throat, her face contorting with effort. For a moment nothing happens. The door remains immobile, unyielding. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, it begins to move. Slowly at first, then faster, the hydraulics whining in protest. Talis snarls, her arms shaking, her fingers leaving dents in the steel. With a final heave, she forces the door open, the lock snapping with a sharp crack. Logan stares, amazed at the raw strength, the sheer power contained in Talis's deceptively slight frame. But Talis is already moving, striding into the room beyond, her blaster raised. And there, on a pedestal in the center of the room, is the Codex. It glows softly, pulsing with an inner light, casting shifting shadows on the walls. Talis reaches for it, her fingers outstretched. And the room explodes in a hail of blaster fire. Logan reacts instinctively, diving for Talis, dragging her to the ground behind the scant cover of the pedestal. Bolts of energy sizzle overhead, scorching the walls, filling the air with the stench of ozone. The Kroll commander steps from the shadows, a smoking blaster in his hand. a cruel smile twisting his scarred face. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" he sneers. His eyes are hard, cold, glittering with malice. "The Codex is mine." He levels his blaster at them, the muzzle unwavering. "And so are you." Logan and Talis lock eyes, a wordless understanding passing between them in a heartbeat. Then they explode into motion, a blur of desperate speed. Talis dives for the Codex, her fingers closing around the ancient artifact. At the same instant, Logan squeezes his blaster's trigger. The bolt catches the Crawl commander in the shoulder, spinning him around. The commander roars, a primal sound of pain and fury, his return shot going wide. "Go!" Talis shouts, hurling the Codex to Logan. "I'll hold him off." Logan hesitates, every instinct screaming at him to stay, to fight at her side. But Talis is already charging the commander, a fierce battle cry tearing from her throat. Logan turns and runs, his fingers clutching the Codex so tightly his knuckles turn white. He bursts from the room, his boots pounding on the rusted metal grates as he sprints down the corridor. Behind him, the sounds of combat erupt, the meaty thud of striking limbs, the sizzle and crack of energy weapons, the grunts and cries of the fighters. The noise tears at him, urging him to turn back to help Talis, but he grits his teeth and runs on, knowing his mission is to get the Codex to safety. He reaches the main chamber and skids to a halt, his stomach turning at the scene of carnage. Bodies litter the floor, Crawl and Daxamite alike, their blood mingling on the rusted metal. The stench of burnt flesh and ozone hangs thick in the recycled air. The surviving Daxamites are retreating, fighting a desperate rearguard action against the press of Crawl reinforcements. "I have the Codex," Logan shouts to the Daxamite commander over the din of battle. "We need to leave now." The commander nods, barking orders to his soldiers. They begin a fighting withdrawal, leapfrogging back towards the exit, their blasters spitting crimson bolts. Logan joins them, his own weapon adding to the barrage. They're almost to the ship, the ramp a tantalizing promise of escape, when a scream cuts through the cacophony of battle like a knife. Logan's heart seizes in his chest. He knows that voice. He spins, his eyes frantically scanning the chaos of the fight. There, Talis locked in desperate combat with the Crawl commander. Even from here, Logan can see she's outmatched. The commander is a mountain of muscle and rage, his strength overwhelming. As Logan watches in helpless horror, the commander lands a brutal blow, the impact hurling Talis to the ground like a rag doll. Logan doesn't hesitate. He's moving before he even realizes it, charging back into the maelstrom, heedless of the blaster bolts crisscrossing the air around him. All that matters is reaching her. He gets there just as the commander raises his blade for the killing stroke. Logan doesn't slow down, doesn't aim. He just points his blaster and fires from the hip. The bolt takes the commander square in the chest, the force of it staggering him back. He looks down at the smoking hole in his armor, a look of almost comical surprise on his brutal face. Then he topples, his eyes already glazing in death. "We have it," Logan assures her. "You're safe now, just hold on." He lifts her as gently as he can, cradling her against his chest as he carries her back towards the ship. The Daxamite soldiers close ranks around them, their blasters keeping the Crawl at bay. They reach the ship, the ramp lifting even as Logan staggers aboard with his precious cargo. The ship lurches as it lifts off, the inertial dampeners struggling to compensate. It blasts away from the moon, leaving the carnage and the horror behind. In the medical bay, Logan can only watch helplessly as the Daxamite doctors work frantically over Talis, their advanced technology knitting her wounds, fighting to keep her alive. He clutches the Codex, feeling the weight of it in his hands, the weight of all it represents. They have what they came for, but looking at Talis so still and pale on the medical table, Logan can't help but wonder, at what cost? The soft, steady beep of the medical monitors was the only sound in the small, dimly lit room. Logan sat beside the healing pod, his eyes fixed on Talis's still form floating within. The last few days had been a blur of worry and waiting, the hours crawling by with agonizing slowness as the Daxamite ship hurtled through the void. Logan's hand rested on the cool, smooth surface of the pod, as if he could somehow will Talis's wounds to heal faster. The doctors had assured him that she was making progress, that the advanced technology was knitting her flesh and mending her bones. But still, he couldn't shake the gnawing fear that clenched in his gut. The hiss of the door made him look up. The Daxamite commander strode in, his face grave and his eyes shadowed. Logan straightened, a sense of foreboding prickling along his spine. "We've received word from the homeworld," the commander said without preamble. "The Crawl have launched a full-scale invasion. They're burning our colonies, slaughtering our people." Logan's grip tightened on the codex, the ancient artifact heavy in his hand. "Then we need to use this. It's the only way to stop them." The commander shook his head, his expression grim. "It's not that simple. The codex is a key, but the weapon it activates, it's ancient, unpredictable. It could destroy the Crawl, but it could also destroy us all." Logan felt a chill run down his spine, a cold dread settling in the pit of his stomach. The choice seemed impossible. Save the Daxamites, but risk the entire galaxy, or do nothing and watch an entire race burn. There was a hiss of releasing pressure, and the healing pod opened. Talis sat up, her movements slow and careful. Her face was set with determination, her lavender eyes clear and sharp. "We use the codex," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "We end this once and for all." The commander started to argue, but Talis cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Set course for the homeworld now." The commander hesitated, then nodded, turning on his heel and striding from the room. Talis swung her legs over the side of the pod, standing on shaky legs. Logan moved to support her, but she waved him off. "I'm fine," she said, though her face was pale and drawn. "We don't have time for weakness." Together, they made their way to the bridge, the ship already turning, plotting a course for the heart of the battle. As they approached the Daxamite homeworld, the scale of the destruction became clear. The once beautiful planet was shrouded in smoke, its cities burning. The Daxamite fleet was in ruins, the few remaining ships fighting a desperate, losing battle against the overwhelming might of the Kral Armada. Talis took the codex from Logan, her hands trembling slightly as she turned it over in her grasp. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "I have to do this," she said softly. Logan nodded, his throat tight. "I know." Talis turned to the commander, who was watching them with a mixture of fear and awe. "Evacuate as many as you can. Get them to safety." The commander started to protest, but a sharp look from Talis silenced him. He nodded, then turned to relay the orders. Talis turned back to Logan, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Come with me," she whispered. Together they boarded a small shuttle, flying towards the coordinates of the ancient weapon. As they approached, the Kral ships turned, weapons locking on, but it was too late. Talis activated the codex and the weapon awoke. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The void of space remained dark and silent, the stars cold and distant. Then a ripple, a distortion in the fabric of reality itself. It spread outward, growing, engulfing the Kral ships in its path. The ships shuddered, their hulls buckling and twisting. Then they simply disintegrated, breaking apart into nothingness as the wave passed through them. The Kral fleet was gone, wiped from existence in the blink of an eye. But the wave didn't stop. It kept growing, kept spreading, annihilating everything in its path. Planets, stars, entire systems vanished, consumed by the relentless march of the ancient weapon. Logan looked at Talis, saw the realization dawning in her eyes. The weapon couldn't be stopped. It would keep growing, keep destroying, until there was nothing left. Talis met his gaze, a sad smile on her face. "It's okay," she said softly. "We did what we had to do." Logan pulled her close, holding her tight as the wave approached. They watched it come, a wall of shimmering energy, beautiful and terrifying in its inexorable advance. Logan closed his eyes, feeling Talis's heartbeat against his chest. They had saved the Daxamites, but the cost was everything. As the wave engulfed their shuttle, Logan's last thought was of Talis, of her bravery, her sacrifice. And then there was only light, bright and blinding, consuming everything. And then nothing at all. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.